The dowry on the snow road today, they call me Dowry. I counted the salt bricks in my trunks and remembered that what truly gets bartered on these frozen roads is the breath of the living. I am 23 summers old, and I have been sold for a piece that tastes of ash. The imperial procession wound through the Caldric Highlands, like a serpent of silk and gold against pristine snow. Princess Leah Severin pressed her gloved fingers to the carriage window, watching her breath fog the glass in rhythmic patterns in, out, each exhalation marking another moment closer to her fate. "Your Highness," Talia whispered from the opposite seat, her voice barely audible over the groaning wheels. "The border approaches. Perhaps you should prepare yourself." Leah's lips curved in what might have been mistaken for a smile. "How does one prepare to be inspected like livestock, Talia? Should I practice my docile expression? Perfect my curtsy?" Her lady's maid, though that title barely scratched the surface of what Talia truly was, shifted uncomfortably. The Northern King is said to value strength above beauty. Then, he'll be thoroughly disappointed. Leah let the lie roll off her tongue with practiced ease. 10 years of playing the waste princess had taught her that people saw what they expected to see. And what they expected was a failure, a pretty ornament who'd fumbled the Academy strategic trials at 14, who spent her days composing terrible poetry and admiring jewelry. None of them knew she could calculate supply line efficiency in her sleep, or that she'd memorized every mountain pass between here and the capital. None of them knew about the star reader blood that sang in her veins when she touched a map, showing her patterns and probabilities like threads of light. None of them knew, and she intended to keep it that way. The carriage lurched to a halt through the frost-etched window. Leah saw them, a line of warriors blocking the road ahead. Unlike the gleaming armor of imperial knights, these northerners wore boiled leather and wolf pelts, their faces marked with ash patterns that turned them into winter spirits. Their horses stood steady despite the wind, breath steaming in the frigid air. At their center, mounted on a gray stallion that seemed carved from storm clouds, sat a figure that made her star reader blood suddenly burn cold. Cal Van, the Wolf King. Even at this distance, even through ice and fading daylight, she could feel the weight of his presence. It pressed against her senses like the promise of an avalanche, massive, patient, inevitable. Out, the command came from a warrior who'd approached the carriage, his accent turning the common tongue into something sharp as broken ice. "The Wolf King will see his bride. As if she already belonged to him. Leah rose smoothly, ignoring Talia's worried grasp at her sleeve. "Stay here." "That's an order. But Your Highness, would you have me appear weak before them?" Leah softened her tone, squeezing Talia's hand briefly. "I must do this alone. Besides, what's the worst that can happen? I'm already sold." She stepped from the carriage into air so cold it felt like swallowing knives. Her silk slippers, chosen by the imperial court to emphasize her supposed delicacy, sank into the snow with each step. The cold bit through the thin fabric immediately, but she kept her pace measured, her spine straight. Let them see what they expected. Let them see the waste princess in her impractical finery, shivering in the cold. The Wolf King dismounted as she approached. He was more than the stories had suggested. Taller, broader, with the kind of presence that made the air around him seem to bend. Where imperial nobles draped themselves in layers of embroidered silk, he wore simple black leather over mail, a wolf pelt across his shoulders that still carried the scent of wild places. His dark hair was pulled back in the northern style, revealing a face that could have been carved from the mountains themselves, all harsh plains and unforgiving angles. His eyes were gray as winter steel, and they missed nothing as they swept over her. Princess Leah Severin. Her name in his mouth sounded like a weapon being tested. 20th in line to the throne. Failed the Academy trials. Known for writing terrible poetry and collecting impractical jewelry, he began to circle her slowly, each footstep deliberate in the snow. This is what the Empire sends to secure peace? Heat flared in her chest, but she kept her expression carefully vacant. "I am what was offered and accepted, Your Majesty." He stopped directly before her, close enough that she could smell pine resin and weapon oil, close enough to see the thin scar that bisected his left eyebrow. From his belt, he withdrew something that made her blood freeze more thoroughly than any wind. Truth ring. The iron circlet glowed faintly with northern runes, promising pain to any who dared lie while wearing it. "Put it on." Leah's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "That wasn't part of the agreement. You're in my territory now." His voice was quiet, dangerous. "My laws. Put it on, or I turn this caravan around and send you back to your father in disgrace. Choose." She could refuse. Return to the capital, face her father's rage, endure the court's mockery. Lose her only chance to uncover the truth about her mother's disappearance. About those secret letters that mentioned the North. Leah took the ring. The moment it settled on her finger, cold fire raced through her veins. The compulsion to speak truth pressed against her thoughts like a living thing, sorting through her carefully constructed walls of lies. "Now," Caller said, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear. "Tell me your true value. Why shouldn't I send you back?" The ring burned, demanding honesty. Around them, his warriors watched in silence. Snow began to fall in earnest, thick flakes that clung to her dark hair. The smart thing would be to give him something small, something expected. The ring wouldn't let her. "Because your supply lines bleed resources like a gutted deer," she heard herself say, the words pulled from her by iron and magic. "Your eastern route loses 30% to spoilage every winter. Your patrol patterns are so predictable that even a child could map the gaps. You're strong, yes, but strength without strategy is just beautiful death." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or calculation. "You presume to know our weaknesses?" ***. I know inefficiency when I see it. The compulsion made her bolder than she'd ever dared be. "Your warriors are the finest in the known world, but you waste them. You could cut your losses by half with proper logistics. Save lives. Win wars without bleeding your people dry." Silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. One of his warriors shifted, hand moving to his sword. Caller raised a single finger without looking, and the man froze. "You claim to see solutions." His gray eyes never left hers. "Tell me one, now." The ring burned hotter, demanding complete truth. "Your communication system. When storms hit, your riders can't reach the outposts. You lose hours, sometimes days. Implement a signal system, horn codes based on wind patterns. Fire beacons at elevation intervals. Simple, effective, would save lives within the week." He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his harsh features. Then, deliberately, he reached out and removed the truth ring from her finger. The absence of its compulsion left her dizzy, gasping. She'd said too much. Revealed too much. The waste princess wasn't supposed to know about supply lines and signal systems. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "Disappointed?" She managed to keep her voice light, even as her knees trembled from cold and fear. "That remains to be seen." He turned to his warriors, switching to the northern tongue. She caught enough to understand. "Make camp at the border stone. The princess rides with us. I have a carriage, which will be useless when the storm hits in full." He was already moving toward his stallion. "You ride with me, or you freeze with your silk and gold. Choose quickly, princess." "I don't wait for southern indecision." She glanced back at the imperial carriage, where Talia watched with wide eyes through the window. Then at the northern warriors, their faces impassive behind their ash patterns. Finally, at the Wolf King himself, who waited by his mount with something that might have been challenge in his storm-gray eyes. "I need my trunks," she said. "My supplies, one trunk. Choose wisely, ***. 2. The second contains medical supplies your healers will need when this storm brings frostbite and worse. He turned back to her fully, and for the first time, she thought she saw approval flicker across his face. "Two, then. But you ride with me." I won't have it said that the Wolf King let his bride freeze on her first night in the north. His bride. There it was again, that assumption of ownership. But she'd deal with that later. Survive first, scheme second. As his warriors collected her trunks, she chose the one with hidden compartments, containing her mother's letters and her private maps. Collar mounted his stallion and extended one hand down to her. ***, no ceremony. No gentleness. Just practical necessity, wrapped in black leather. ***, she took his hand. He pulled her up in one fluid motion, settling her sideways in front of him. The position should have been awkward, but his arms came around her to hold the reins, creating a cage of warmth that smelled of pine and leather and something wild. This close, she could feel the steady beat of his heart against her shoulder blade, could see the way his jaw clenched when she shifted to find her balance. ***, hold on, princes," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear as snow began to fall in earnest. "The North doesn't forgive." The stallion surged forward, and Leah found herself pressed back against the Wolf King's chest as they rode into the gathering storm. Behind them, the imperial carriage already looked small, a speck of gold being swallowed by white. The border stone loomed ahead, a monument of black rock carved with runes that seemed to pulse with their own light. Beyond it lay the true north, the realm of the Wolf King, where bone oaths and blood magic held more weight than gold or silk. "Your Majesty," she said as they passed the stone, raising her voice above the wind, "when we reach your camp, I'll need to see your supply manifests." She felt his chest rumble with what might have been laughter. "You assume I'll allow it. I assume you're intelligent enough to use every weapon available to you." She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze directly. "Even the ones that come wrapped in silk and southern prejudice." For a moment, their eyes locked, steel against amber, north against south, wolf against star. The air between them crackled with something electric, dangerous as lightning and twice as unpredictable. Then his mouth curved in what might have been a smile, small and fierce and edged with teeth. "We shall see, princess. We shall see what you truly are beneath all that softness." The storm broke over them in earnest then, turning the world into a chaos of white and wind. But held secure in the Wolf King's grip, racing toward an uncertain future, Leah felt something she hadn't experienced since her mother disappeared. Not safe, she would never be safe again, but alive, brilliantly, terrifyingly alive. And perhaps, just perhaps, exactly where she needed to be. Chapter 2. The Tent and the Ring. From the War Bride's Journal. He drew a line with his blade between us in the tent. Steel to mark boundaries, as if metal could hold back what storms bring together. I count the inches between his breathing and mine. 12, maybe 13. Close enough to share warmth, far enough to maintain lies. The storm hit within the hour, just as Caller had predicted. Leah had never experienced anything like it. Not the gentle snow flurries that occasionally dusted the capital's gardens, but a howling beast of ice and wind that seemed intent on erasing the world. The northern warriors moved with practiced efficiency, erecting tents with the speed of men who'd done this 1,000 times in worse conditions. She stood in the chaos, silk dress already soaked through, watching as Talia struggled with their assigned shelter. The imperial servants were useless here, their soft hands fumbling with foreign knots and stakes. "Move!" The command came from behind her. Rock, Caller's second in command, pushed past to take the tent poles from Talia's shaking hands. The massive warrior had the shelter up in moments, his scarred face showing neither kindness nor cruelty, just efficiency. "Thank you," Leah said in the northern tongue, the words rough but recognizable. Rock's eyes widened slightly. "You speak our language?" "Poorly." She kept her tone light, self-deprecating. "I thought it might be polite to learn." He grunted, something that might have been approval, then jerked his head toward the tent. Inside. The Wolf King wants you ready to move at dawn. Leah helped Talia into the shelter first, then turned back to Rock. The supply wagons they need to be, already handled. His expression grew suspicious. Why would a princess care about supply wagons? Because improperly stored grain will rot in this moisture. Because the medical supplies will freeze if not insulated. Because, she said with a practiced, empty smile. My jewelry is in one of them. The suspicion faded, replaced with the contempt she'd expected. Good. Let him think her vain. Inside the tent, Talia was already shivering violently. Leah immediately began sorting through their limited supplies. 2 fur blankets, a small oil lamp, their travel rations. Not enough. Not nearly enough for 2 people in this cold. Your Highness, Talia whispered through chattering teeth. Perhaps we could ask for more. No, Leah was already calculating heat distribution, survival priorities. We make do with what we have. Take off your wet outer clothes. But wet fabric will kill you faster than modesty. She was already stripping off her ruined silk dress, laying it flat where it might dry. Underneath, she wore the practical wool undergarments she'd hidden beneath all that finery. We share body heat. It's the only way. She was arranging the furs, creating an insulated pocket when the tent flap opened. Caller stood in the entrance, snow swirling around him like a personal storm. His gray eyes took in the seeing her in wool underclothes, Talia half undressed and shaking, the carefully arranged furs. Out, he said to Talia. Asterisk, asterisk. She stays, Leah countered immediately. She'd die in this cold. She'd share with the other servants. They know how to survive a northern storm. His tone brooked no argument. You share with me. The words landed like a physical blow. That's not appropriate. Nothing about this situation is appropriate. Princess, he stepped fully into the tent, forcing Talia to scramble past him. But I won't have you freezing to death on your first night. The political consequences would be ... inconvenient. Talia shot Leah a panicked look, but there was nothing to be done. The servant disappeared into the storm, and Leah was left alone with the Wolf King. He began stripping off his outer layers with the same practical efficiency she'd shown moments before. No self-consciousness, no acknowledgement of the intimacy of the situation. Just survival. There are rules, Leah said, hating how her voice shook slightly. Name them. No skin contact. We keep clothed. And she gestured to the space between the furs. Something between us. He pulled his sword from its sheath, laying it carefully in the middle of the bedroll. Will this suffice? A blade between them. How perfectly symbolic. Yes, they arranged themselves on opposite sides of the weapon, backs to each other. The furs pulled high. The wind howled outside, making the tent walls snap and billow. Despite the barrier between them, she could feel his heat, smell the pine and leather scent of him mixed with something else, Wolf, she realized. He smelled like the wild itself. Your servant, he said after a moment. She's not what she seems. Leah's body tensed. I don't know what you mean. She holds herself like someone who's been trained. Her hands have ink stains in the patterns of a scribe. And she understood every word of northern dialect I spoke, even though she pretended otherwise. Damn, he was more observant than she'd anticipated. Everyone has secrets. Leah said carefully, yes. His voice was thoughtful. For instance, you knew exactly how to arrange those furs for maximum heat retention. You stripped down without the hysteria I'd expect from a pampered princess. And when you looked at the storm, you weren't seeing weather, you were calculating survival rates. She said nothing, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Tell me, Princess, he continued, his voice low and dangerous. What happens when the court discovers their waste princess is anything but the same thing that happens when your warriors discover their Wolf King spends his nights knotting bone cords like a child seeking comfort. She felt him go completely still behind her. The silence stretched, Taut and dangerous. Asterisk. Then, impossibly, he laughed, a low, rumbling sound she felt through the furs. You noticed that? You had rope burns on your palms inconsistent with weapon use. The pattern matched the bone cords your shamans use for protection rituals. But yours were knotted repeatedly, obsessively. It's a soothing mechanism, isn't it? Something from childhood. You see too much. Princess, asterisk, as do you, your majesty. They lay in silence after that. But it was a different kind of quiet charged with understanding, with the recognition of masks acknowledging each other without quite falling away. The supply lines, he said suddenly. How would you fix them? She should have deflected, played dumb. Instead, she found herself talking, explaining rotation schedules and preservation techniques, her voice growing stronger as she outlined solutions she'd been thinking about since she'd first studied the northern trade routes years ago. Asterisk. He asked questions, sharp, intelligent ones that made her think, made her refine her ideas. It was like a dance, their minds meeting across the barrier of steel between them. The eastern route, she was saying. If you station supply caches at the 3rd and 7th waypoints, a sound outside made them both freeze. Footsteps, multiple sets, approaching the tent. Your Majesty. The voice was one of his warriors. The forward patrol is missing. Collar was up instantly, already pulling on his outer layers. How long? 2 hours past check-in. Asterisk. Leah sat up, mind racing. The storm's eye will pass over the northern valley in approximately 30 minutes. If they're sheltering there, both men turned to stare at her. How could you possibly know that? The warrior demanded. She met Collar's gaze steadily. The pressure changes. The wind patterns. Anyone who studied weather formations would recognize. Anyone who studied military meteorology. You mean? Collar interrupted. His expression was unreadable. Get my commanders. We move in 20 minutes. Asterisk. The warrior disappeared, and Collar turned back to her. You're coming with me. I am? You know where they are. And I want to see if your tactical knowledge extends beyond theory. He tossed her a northern warrior's coat, thick, practical, nothing like her silks. Try not to die, princess. It would be politically inconvenient. But there was something else in his eyes now. Something that hadn't been there before. Interest, real interest. Not in the princes he'd been sold, but in the mind she'd accidentally revealed. And princess? He paused at the tent entrance. Next time you share information that could save my warriors' lives, don't wait for the pretense of sleep to do it. Then he was gone, leaving her to scramble into the unfamiliar clothes, her heart racing with something that wasn't quite fear. Outside, she could hear him barking orders, organizing search parties with brutal efficiency. She pulled on the coat. It smelled like him. She noticed with an unwanted flutter in her stomach and stepped out into the storm. Warriors looked at her with surprise and suspicion, but Collar simply pointed to a map spread on a makeshift table, snow already covering its surface. Show me, he commanded. She did, her finger tracing patterns only she could fully see, the star reader blood in her veins singing as it recognized the convergence of probability and outcome. Here, she said with certainty. They're here, you're certain? She met his gaze directly. Yes, he nodded once, decisive. Mount up. I can't ride in this. He was already lifting her onto his stallion, swinging up behind her in one fluid motion. His arms came around her again, but this time it felt different. This time, she wasn't a package being delivered. This time, she was something else entirely. Hold on, he murmured against her ear as they plunged into the white chaos of the storm. Let's see if you're as clever as you pretend not to be, the wind screamed around them. But all Leah could focus on was the solid warmth at her back and the terrifying realization that she wanted to prove herself to him. Not as a princess, not as a political pawn, but as herself, whatever that meant anymore. Asterisk. He asked me how to speak to the wind. I showed him patterns in sound that the Empire would call primitive. But there's nothing primitive about survival. Nothing simple about the language of those who refuse to die. Tonight, we exchanged secrets in the dark, his curse for my mother's ghost. We're building something dangerous. Trust. They found the forward patrol exactly where Leah had predicted, huddled in a wind-carved hollow in the northern valley, half frozen but alive. The rescue should have been her triumph, proof of her value beyond decoration. Instead, it became her first real test. Asterisk, asterisk. How? Lord Grimner, one of Caller's senior commanders, demanded the moment they returned to the main camp. His weathered face was twisted with suspicion. How did a southern princess know where our warriors would shelter? The command tent fell silent. A dozen northern nobles watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. At the head of the rough wooden table, Caller sat motionless, offering neither support nor condemnation. A test, she realized. He's seeing if I can stand on my own. The wind patterns, Leah said, keeping her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Your storms follow predictable cycles. The eye passed over that valley at exactly the right time to provide shelter. Asterisk, asterisk. Storms aren't predictable. Grimner spat. They're the breath of the Wolf gods, random, savage. With respect, Lord Grimner, everything has a pattern. She moved to the table, where a rough map of the region lay spread. Your storms come from the northwest, always. They build pressure here. She traced a finger along the mountain range. And release here. The valley your patrol found is the only shelter along that pressure line that would have been accessible in the time they had. Southern magic. Someone muttered. Southern mathematics, she corrected. Though I understand the confusion. Both involve seeing what others miss. A few warriors chuckled at that. Grimner's face darkened further. You claim to read the weather like your poets read their pretty verses? I claim to read patterns, Lord Grimner. In weather, in supply consumption. She paused, meeting his gaze directly. In the fact that your forward patrols always return 3 pounds lighter in provisions than they should. Suggesting someone is skimming supplies. The tent went deadly quiet. Grimner's hand went to his sword. You dare accuse. I accuse no one. Leah kept her voice calm, though her heart raced. I simply observe. 3 pounds consistently, across 7 patrol returns. Either your men are all dieting in exact proportions, or someone thinks small enough thefts won't be noticed. She turned to Caller. Your Majesty asked for my value. This is it. I see patterns. I see waste. I see solutions. Caller finally stirred, leaning forward slightly. And what solution do you propose for our communication problem? My warriors are scattered across 300 miles of territory. When storms hit, Bone whistles. The words fell into the tent like dropped stones. Explain, Caller commanded. Leah pulled a small object from her coat, a whistle carved from what looked like deer bone, taken from the supply wagons. Your shamans use these for rituals, but they could be more. Each whistle produces a unique tone based on its size and carving. Create a code, 3 short blasts for danger, 2 long for all clear, patterns for different messages. The sound carries further than voices, cuts through wind better than horns. And in a full blizzard? Rock asked from his position by the tent entrance. When you can't see 5 feet. Fire signals as backup. Not bonfires, those waste wood and can't be controlled. Small, shielded flames at set intervals. Oil-soaked cloth in metal containers, visible only from specific angles. Your enemies won't see them, but your patrols will know where to look. She pulled out a piece of charcoal and began sketching on the map, showing placement points, angles of visibility, patrol routes that would maximize coverage while minimizing exposure. The nobles leaned in despite themselves, watching her work. This is theoretical, Grimner protested, but his voice had lost some of its edge. Then test it, Leah challenged. Give me 10 warriors for 3 days. I'll train them in the basics. If it doesn't work, send me back to the capital in disgrace. And if it does work." Collar's voice was neutral, but she caught something in his eyes' interest, perhaps even approval. "Then you implement it across your entire territory and stop losing warriors to preventable communication failures." Silence stretched through the tent. Then Collar stood, a fluid motion that drew every eye. Asterisk, asterisk, "You have your 10 warriors," he said. 3 days. Rock will oversee the training to ensure you don't accidentally kill anyone with southern incompetence. A few nobles laughed, but it was less mocking than before. "However," Collar continued, "move in closer to her. You'll train them properly. No hiding behind your servant. No pretending you barely understand what you're teaching." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "If you're going to revolutionize our communications, own it. Stop playing the waste princess. And if your nobles turn against me for revealing I'm not the fool they expected, then you'll learn what northern politics actually look like." His gray eyes held hers. "Consider it part of your education, princess." As the meeting dispersed, Lord Grimner passed close to her. "Clever southern witch," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. "But cleverness won't save you when the real storms come." After he left, Leah found herself alone with Collar and Rock. "He's not wrong," Rock said bluntly. "Showing intelligence makes you a target." "Being useless would make me a different kind of target," Leah replied. "At least this way, I'm valuable enough to protect." Collar made a sound that might have been approval. "Come, if you're going to train warriors, you need to understand how they think." He led her out into the night, where the camp sprawled beneath a canopy of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The storm had passed, leaving crystal-clear air that bit at her lungs. They walked in silence until they reached a cleared circle where several warriors sat around a carefully banked fire. At Collar's approach, they started to rise, but he waved them down. "Tell her about the bone march," he commanded. Settling onto a log with the casual grace of a man equally comfortable on throne or ground. Leah sat carefully, aware of the warriors' suspicious gazes. One of them, scarred and gray-bearded, began to speak in the northern tongue, story of a winter when the clans had to move their entire population across frozen wastes, using only bone whistle signals to coordinate in a blizzard that lasted 8 days. Asterisk, asterisk, half died, the warrior concluded, but half lived. Without the whistles, all would have perished. "So you already use them for communication," Leah said slowly. "Just not systematically. We use what works when we must," Collar said. "But we've never thought to make it regular, planned, because planning is southern weakness?" She asked, allowing a slight smile. "Because we've survived this long without it," he corrected. "But survival and thriving are different things." The admission hung between them, surprisingly honest. Later, when the warriors had drifted away and they walked back toward the command tents, Collar spoke again. "The curse you mentioned. When we shared the tent." "He said when the real storms come." Leah hesitated. They were treading dangerous ground now. "There are records," she said carefully. "Old ones in the Imperial archives. They speak of storms that aren't natural. Storms that bring other things. The devouring." She stopped walking. "You know about it?" "Every Wolf King knows. It's why we exist. Why the clans united in the first place." He turned to face her, his expression grave. "The magical storms that bring monsters from the far north. They've been quiet for 30 years, but the signs are returning. The bone readers see it. The wolves feel it, and you think they're coming back. I know they are. Within the year, perhaps sooner." His gray eyes searched hers. "Your father knows too. It's why he agreed to this marriage. He needs our warriors when the devouring comes, just as we need your grain and steel. So we're all using each other," Leah said quietly. "Did you expect otherwise?" She thought of her mother's letters hidden in her trunk. of the real reason she'd agreed to come north. "No," she admitted. "But I had hoped there might be truth mixed with the using." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps a recognition. "Truth," he said slowly, as if tasting the word. "A dangerous thing to hope for, Princess." "Leah," she said suddenly, "if we're going to speak of truth, use my name. I'm tired of being princess like it's all I am." He studied her for a long moment. Then, deliberately, "Leah." Her name in his mouth sounded different than when others said it, weightier, more real. "There's something else," she said, emboldened by the darkness and strange intimacy of the moment. "In those same records that mention the devouring, there are references to a cure. A way to break the blood curse that makes your warriors vulnerable to the storm madness." Caller went very still. "What do you know of that curse?" "I know it's why your sister died. Why every Volf king fears what battle might bring. Why you tie those bone cords obsessively, hoping the old protections might work." She met his gaze steadily. "I know because my mother was studying it before she disappeared." The silence stretched between them, charged with possibility and danger. "Your mother," he said finally. "The one who supposedly betrayed the Empire to flee north. The one who was searching for something in the northern archives. Something important enough to risk everything." Leah's voice dropped. "I need access to your bone sanctum. To the old records kept there. That's forbidden to outsiders. So was sharing intelligence about patrol positions. So was teaching me your language. So was letting me sleep in your tent with only a sword between us." She stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat. "We're already breaking rules, Your Majesty Caller. Why not break ones that might actually save your people?" He caught her wrist suddenly, not painfully, but firmly. She realized with a start that her left wrist was bare, the marriage mark exposed. His thumb rested just beside it, close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin. "Careful," he murmured, his voice low and dangerous. "You're playing with forces you don't understand. Then teach me to understand." For a heartbeat, she thought he might close that final distance, might press his thumb to the mark and seal both their fates. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Then voices approached, guards on patrol, and he released her. Stepping back, 3 days, he said, his voice returning to its normal commanding tone. "Prove your whistle system works. Then we'll discuss the sanctum." As he walked away, Leah pressed her hand to her wrist where his touch still burned. "What am I doing?" she thought. But she knew the answer. She was building trust, earning access, getting closer to the truth about her mother. The fact that she was also getting closer to him, that was just a complication. A dangerous, intoxicating complication that might destroy them both. You've reached the end of The Last War Bride. Continue reading the full read here.